All right. Thank you very much. My name is Lindsay Ashley. I'm with the Texas Film Commission, and on behalf of the office, we just want to thank Nat Geo and the ATX Festival for this partnership. We're very proud of the show, and we're very excited to have this conversation with you guys this evening. This screening is in honor of Veterans Day weekend, so again, thank you to all of our veterans and to our active service members for your service to this country. And thanks again to the audiences in the Alamo Drafthouse theaters around the country. So. All right, Miko, you have been with this show for a really long time. It has been 9 years in the making for you. Can you tell us a little bit about when you first read the book and how you knew that you were going to be involved?
Yes, so Mike Metaboy, who is one of our producers, he sent me the book in 2008, and I read it in one sitting. I thought it was one of the most astonishing pieces of reporting, certainly war reporting, that I had ever read. And I think what struck me was, I think that what Hollywood gets wrong so many times, or doesn't, the stories that we don't tell, so many stories are about the elite soldiers, the super soldiers, special forces soldiers, and this was the first intimate portrait of the ordinary everyman soldier, the soldiers who make up the vast majority of our armed forces, and not just them, but their families. And I've said this before, but I fell in love with all these soldiers, their families, before I ever met them, and I just became infused with this mission with Mike and Martha, that we were going to get this story told no matter how long it took. We didn't realize it was going to take 9 years, but we were determined that we were going to do it.
And can you talk a little bit about Martha and her involvement through the life cycle of this process and how you've collaborated with her?
I mean, one of the most inspiring things about Martha to me is that she has now for more than 13 years cared about these families. She first told their stories on Nightline, and then in follow-up reports, and then in her remarkable book. And I feel like she literally rescued everyone from being lost to history, because no one knew at the time how momentous a day April 4th would be. No one knew at the time that this was literally the start of the insurgency from which would come the, other things, the virtual collapse of the Iraqi state, the birth of ISIS, through Thomas Young, Cindy Sheehan, the birth of the modern anti-war movement, all these different threads of history. But she really cared about the people, and I feel that myself, Mike, my fellow producers, everyone who became involved in this project, our amazing cast, everyone cared so much about these families and wanted to have their stories told.
But Eric, this is your story. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. You had a very valuable perspective. You lived this. Martha wrote the book and very much featured your story as part of the book. When these folks came to you and said, we want to turn this into a television show, how did you and your family respond?
Yeah, initially I was very hesitant because I was opening up, a lot of my life, and then even more so, and with the spotlight that National Geographic could put on it, and then just the medium about which is being put out, on television. I was very apprehensive. But, after getting to know Miko and everybody involved and seeing the amount of heart and the soul they put into it, and how they really wanted to be inclusive and make sure that people were actually represented to be able to show what sacrifice actually is and what it means to actually serve and be a family member of a service member, and even what the local nationals, what they were thrust into also by us being there. So it was a pretty big deal to get involved in all that, but now I'm really happy that I had the opportunity and that I was involved.
Was there a moment when you realized that you trusted them with this story?
Yeah, it was at, what's the name of that restaurant, Leslie? Kirby Lane. That's my wife up there. I have a very bad memory, but me and Miko, one of our very first interactions, in person, we went to Kirby Lane, and we were having a meal there, and he was just telling me his background and about what all he did beforehand. And, prior to this time, I'd lost a lot of my empathy, and I've slowly regained a lot of it back. And it was just through this process of meeting Miko and seeing where his heart was and trying to get this story told.
And you became an advisor on the show.
Yes, I was a technical advisor, a consultant for it. It was part of my responsibilities were to ensure the equipment was as correct as it could be. Everything was as period specific as it was able to be. I had fantastic support through one of my best friends. He, Aaron Fowler, he did an amazing amount of work in making sure everything was as authentic as it possibly could. And we used social media really to reach out to a lot of the participants of the battle to be able to get their input on what they remember and how they remembered it, so we could kind of tailor it around to them.
May I add to something here? I just think that the incredible bravery of you, Aaron, all the veterans that we spoke with, it's a very strange thing when you enter people's lives to talk about something that's so painful. You're basically asking people to reopen a wound over and over again. I remember I interviewed probably close to 70 veterans and family members and asked people to take me through the day minute by minute. And the only reason I feel that we have the level of authenticity in the show that we do is because people were willing to go through that over and over again in multiple interviews. And so I am so grateful to you and Aaron and everyone who participated in this, you guys especially, because you were there every day. You were the guides for us, for our actors, and it's a rare thing to be able to tell a story about a real-life event and talk to the real-life families. So many families reached out to us and said, I would like to do anything I can to help. And it was so much of it was due to your outreach to the community, too.
Well, thank you.
So, Noel and Catherine, as actors on the show, the roles are very high stakes. These are actual people that you're portraying. So, what kind of research process did you go through to get prepared?
Me personally, I was really lucky on a number of ways. Kathy and Nathan and the rest of Thomas's family were incredibly welcoming and as Miko was saying, open to discussing, ripping open this wound again, and letting me into their lives and getting to know as intimate as I got to know Thomas as well as I can because of their generosity with that. I actually got to go to Kansas City and spend some time with them. I got to see photos of Thomas and Nathan and their family growing up. I got to read a letter, the only letter that he actually sent from Iraq. Kathy was just incredibly generous in letting me in, and I'm really, really thankful for that. And I was also lucky because there's a lot of material on Thomas as well. There's a documentary called The Body of War that I think everyone should go see. It's on YouTube. There's also a book that I got to read, a wonderful book called Thomas Young's War that really does a really great job of putting you in the position and understanding what this kind of an injury actually is, because it's a lot more than just what it appears to be, and there's a lot more complexity and hardship that kind of comes along with this kind of a thing, and the life that he went back to, and how huge of a world shift that was. It was, yeah.
So I would just echo what Noel said. We were really lucky in that there was a number of resources available to us. The documentary, which started right after Thomas got married, they spent their honeymoon at Crawford, and that kind of started his activism journey, as well as Thomas Young's War. It talks a lot about his early life before this experience, and I have to say Kathy was an incredible resource. The first email I sent to her, I was like, I have questions. If you want to pass on any question, please, by all means, take the pass. And with every single question I asked her, she said, as painful as it may be, you are telling my son's story, and to whatever degree I can help with that, I will help with that. And let me add something really quick. I don't know if you know this, but Friday we had a screening in Virginia of this episode, and it was the anniversary of Thomas Young's passing. He passed 3 years ago on November 10th. And so I sent Kathy a message at the beginning of the day saying, we are screening, we are doing our first screening and Q&A of this story of Thomas. Is there anything you would like the audience to know? And she sent me an email back. Do you mind if I read that? Because I think it would be powerful. Also, Kathy just sent a text and said it was wonderful. So love to you guys in Kansas City, Kathy. And, truly, that's really all that matters. If they felt like we did right by them. So I hope you don't mind if I read this to everyone, Kathy, because here it goes. Dearest Kat, I have typed and deleted and started over again and again. Words are hard when they come from such a deep place as the heart. This project has changed so many people's lives. It's different for me than for the mothers who lost their sons on that dark day in April. I was given the gift of 10 more years with my baby boy. We had so many experiences in that 10 years. The thing that keeps hitting me about this project is the love that came from everyone. You and Noel worked so hard to get us. That love isn't lost on me. I had an epiphany the other day. I was watching Gina Denemy, who's the wife of Troy Denemy, who rescue mission, he was one of the officers who did the rescue mission. She talked about the warriors taking their wives into battle with them. I realized at that moment, Martha captured something that has seldom, if ever, been captured in a book, and then Miko got it and carried through the screen. That thing that makes this so different, so special, is the realization that the warrior's family is different. I recognized it in Sylvia, who's a Gold Star mother, and Gina when I met them. When I watched you in the scene talking to Valesky, I realized that you got it. And it is little more than a woman who cares for her child. It's a woman that cares for the warrior. You raise your children to be warriors against the world, so you feel it. I saw it in Sarah as Leanne Valesky. I saw it in the actress that plays Sylvia, and certainly in Kate Bosworth as Gina Denemy. We prepare for the death of our children before we leave. We go over the plans for their funeral, the music, the church, the officiant. We face death when they go to war. My son faced death and came back. He fucking triumphed over death for a while. The retelling of his story keeps his memory alive. Thank you to each and every person that watches Thomas's episode and utters his name. Thank you. They say no soldier dies until his name is no longer spoken. Thank you for everyone for keeping my baby boy's memory alive. Sending this with so much love, Kathy. So,
Wow. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for sharing. Speaking of families, you all made this at Fort Hood, where the 1st Cavalry Division was based, and that was a partnership in and of itself, not just with the U.S. Army, but I know there were folks who would come to you and say, I was here when that happened, in different variations. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration and the ways in which they opened up their arms to you right there on the Army post?
Was an amazing thing. People may not know this, but I was a first-time showrunner, so I wasn't sure if I was allowed to make decisions like, we're going to have an open-door policy, and all families and veterans are allowed to visit the set whenever they want. Then I realized I am the showrunner, and I can make that call. And we had one of the most powerful days in that respect is that we were filming the goodbye scenes when it was the anniversary of April 4th. And Martha and I talked about we wanted to do a minute of silence for the fallen, and especially on that day because we knew a lot of veterans, a lot of families would come to Fort Hood, that they would get to meet the real life people. I had always, as soon as we cast the parts, I asked people to reach out to the real life family members, and I just want to acknowledge something unique about Noel. Noel actually would not accept the part unless he could meet with Thomas's family. So that's how committed he was to doing it right. But everyone in the cast formed these extraordinary relationships. I've seen now messages from family members who feel like the actors who portray their loved ones lost, or just those who are still living, they feel like family to them. And I always told people when I would interview, like I told this to Eric when I first talked to him, I said, the people whose opinion I care the most about are the people whose story this really is. That matters more to me than critics or anyone else, because it happened to real people, and that's what we want to honor with this. So it was an extraordinary privilege, and still feels surreal that we had people who had lived through this first be there for the goodbye scene, which I imagine must have been surreal, because the uniforms that everyone wears in the story haven't existed for years. We had to make all of them, and to come back to Fort Hood and see 400 people in those uniforms with the names that people knew was probably, I think, there was a sense of closure, but I can't even imagine how hard that is. Or walking down the streets of Sadr City, which we tried to create as authentically as we could, and Eric led a lot of veterans through that, and I think people were just silent. I think that was the most common reaction I saw. People, maybe you can speak to what it was like for the...
I was pretty fortunate in the sense that I got to revisit my battlefield. A lot of modern day service members won't be able to do that, just because of the shape of the world as it is right now. Being able to go back there and just experience it in the comfort and safety of, one, just being on a military base, and two, just being back at home, it gave me a sense of relief. And then being able to share that gift with a lot of my platoon mates that were able to make it and come back out too, it gave me a lot of healing. I've been in therapy since '08. One of my tours when I was in Afghanistan, as soon as I got back from that, I started doing therapy. But from that point up until this show started, I thought I was doing pretty good. But sitting, when did pre-production start? In February. From February up until this point, I've gotten just as much healing, if not more, because I've been able to live in, a museum pretty much of, a bad day in my life, and being able to witness it all, but being able to do it from, a place of safety.
Wow, that's incredible.
May I just add one thing? I just want to acknowledge Fort Hood and everyone who helped us with the production. It was one of those incredible things where we were the first major production to ever film in Fort Hood. So there was a lot of, what would you call it, clash of cultures of what film production needs and what the military actually does on military bases. And it was sometimes resulted in dramatic requests like, let's shut down the only road that goes from the Mount site to the cantonment area that can support heavy vehicles, which requires 16 days advance notice and triplicate forms and 16 signatures, but we need it for tomorrow. And they always made it happen. Mary Middlestead, Todd Fox, everyone who worked there, Kelly Pickett, they since we first proposed to them the idea of filming in Fort Hood, they embraced us, and it was one of the most extraordinary things. Same thing really for the Army. They knew from the very beginning that Thomas Young's story was going to be a part of this, and they embraced the story because they wanted the full truth to be told and for audiences to understand that this is what the experience is really like for our nation's military families during and after.
Let's talk a little bit more about that set. 12 acres of scenery, and the largest freestanding set in North America during the time of production. And Eric had mentioned that you all started building it in February. Can you talk a little bit about your art department and your production designer and kind of the links that they went to in conjunction with you, Eric, to get all that right?
Sure, it was an astonishing feat. Seth Reed, who's our production designer, and Alan Glover and Ellen King, who were the art directors, they spent 6.5 months researching and building the set. And it was one of those things, we knew that we could not film in Sadr City. That was just an impossibility for, first of all, who would ensure our cast going to Sadr City, who would bring military vehicles. It was an impossibility, but once we knew that we could film in Fort Hood, there was something poetic about trying to rebuild Sadr City on the very site where the troops that our story is about trained. And so we got as many photographs and video as we could from a lot of veterans. Carl Wild, who had taken pictures on the day on the rooftop, for example. A lot of the rooftop, it's uncannily accurate to it. Seth Reed, every resource that we could have for Martha's raw footage, we would try to replicate. The buildings that you see when the platoon enters the alley are exact replicas. the house we created from multiple interviews with different veterans, which is its own fascinating story that, what people remember about the interior, the stairwell, it's almost a mosaic of memory that we tried to create as authentically as we could, but it was an astonishing thing to see come to life. I remember I went to New York once for a marketing event for the series, and nothing had been set on fire at that point. I come back 2 days later, and the entire set is on fire, and I felt like I had stepped into Iraq. Martha said once that she was walking and had to remind herself, you don't have to look for IEDs on the ground. That's how realistic it looked.
It looked pretty realistic. He was talking about Seth Reed and his team. They visited Jordan, they visited Morocco, they brought in 5 different types of sand and dirt to try and recreate the feel of it. They built, 83 buildings that were new buildings that were built to recreate the alleyway, the houses, and all the buildings that were used to there. And the only thing that was missing was just a smell because of the raw sewage. But it was pretty authentic the way it was set up. And he was talking about how eerie it was being up on top on the roof. It was crazy being able to stand there, look over the side of the wall, look down into the alley, and just being able to visualize it again from a place of safety, especially with it being, about 99.9% perfect.
This feels like you're watching a film with all the action sequences, and you do a very delicate dance between the stories back at home and the sequences in Sutter City. Can you talk a little bit about formulating that strategy when you were finalizing the scripts and getting ready for production, and how you were going to negotiate that balance?
I mean, one of the things that the series draws direct inspiration from Martha's book, which is structured that it goes from the war front to the home front and back. And I wanted to really preserve that because I think no one had ever seen, before I read Martha's book, I will confess, I had never heard of a family readiness group. I didn't know what that was. And I don't think I had really thought about, we talk a lot about, in our country, about bravery and sacrifice and of our military families, but this book, to me, for the first time, illuminated what that is actually like. We're all distressed when we are separated from our spouses for a long time, but most of our spouses are not in harm's way for the entire time. And I really wanted to capture that. And I think this is a unique episode in that this is the only episode where we visit the future of one of our characters. Episode 5, we switch point of view to the Iraqi side, so the past, the home front, if you will, that we see is in Sutter City the year before. But it was very important to me that we tried to flow in and out of the home front so that whether you were on the war front and you leave for the home front, you don't want to leave, but then once you're on the home front, you don't want to go back, so that you see how compelling the stories are. So by the time we resume in episode 7, which follows this one, we are back to the home front structure that we established in the beginning of the series.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to open it up to audience questions, if we have any. Anyone? Yeah. I know. Kleenex break, right? Well, I want.
There's one right there.
Yes.
Do you feel that this movie will bring as much cathartic healing for other veterans as it has brought for you? I think a lot of, being a military brat myself, I never served, but every elder of mine was veterans, and I've seen all kinds of effects, both positive and negative. So I was wondering if you felt that this was going to be a movie that veterans would resist, don't want to go there, or that it might bring more healing.
I believe that what this will be, it'll be a transition for everybody to be able to actually experience and understand what the sacrifice that's involved with service, and with people being able to identify with what's going on. Because that could be any military, it could be any military family, it could be any nation's military, and people will be able to relate to it. And if, it reaches one more, other than me, then, I'm all for it. I know personally that, it's been touched on up here that 5 of the families have expressed their gratitude and, told me thank you. And I don't really know how to respond to that, because the reason their family members are dead is because I'm still alive. And I've got to be able to make sure that they're remembered. And through that way, that's where I get a lot of healing from. And I think others will get the same thing, especially because they were able to visit the set too. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes, up underneath the projector.
I'm curious, this was a global event, and I've gotten no feeling of what the global response has been to at least the first episode that went out. And do you guys have any sense of that response from other countries?
I think we'll know next week, because even though our official premiere date is November 7th, different countries choose their own air dates. So in some countries it started on the 5th or 6th. Some countries it won't start until next week. So I know that, well, I can speak for my home country of Finland, where it premiered on Wednesday. The response has been tremendous. And I think I talked a lot about this when we did our European press tour, is that even though this is an American story and it's about a specific day in the Iraq War, I think there are timeless and universal things here that are true for all military families, no matter what country's armed forces you serve in, whether it is people sending peacekeepers to different things. And I think we saw this when we were in Europe. A lot of the foreign press who had seen several episodes remarked on that, and it feels remarkably universal. Because ultimately, to me, this is a story about soldiers and families and what our nation's military families go through. And that is, to me, the great untold story that we need to pay more attention to, as well as what our returning veterans go through. I am so proud of National Geographic for the accompanying campaign to this. Eric Carl Wild and Ben Hayhurst recorded these extraordinary virtual reality documentary segments about traumatic memory. We have an app for veterans for meditation to help cope with PTSD. And National Geographic has partnered with numerous veterans organizations, because I think, again, just as we talk about the bravery and sacrifice of our military families, our veterans need our attention. The fact that 20 veterans are lost to suicide every day should be a national emergency. It is a national emergency, and it's a conversation that we should be talking about today.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? Yes. Mindy.
Hopefully I can talk here. It's very emotional. Amazing job. Thank you guys for telling these stories and bringing them to everyone's attention. Is there plans for continuing these stories, not, with different battles that have happened, continuing these stories? Is there talks about that?
We've had some very tentative conversations about what a season 2 might look like, potentially with a different unit and a different battle, because I do think that there is something about how personal the story is. I think that's what struck me about the book, and that's what we have hoped to capture. So, yes, I guess is the answer. We hope, yes.
That's actually a good point. There are so many characters in the book. How did you hone in on the ones that you chose to devote entire episodes to?
Well, it's interesting because in the book you follow probably 60 characters, and you have no difficulty in navigating who everyone is. And I think for television audiences, we have 122 speaking roles in the story. You will get to know certainly 40 soldiers by name pretty well. I think that I wanted to find unique points of view, but also things that were universally true for different families. I knew that I wanted different command level perspectives, but I also knew that I didn't want just the stories of the survivors or the commanders or just, frankly, the white soldiers. It was very important to me that our cast would be diverse, that we also represented the Iraqi point of view, and all those things. When you watch the entire series, you'll see how much time we devote to that.
Okay, yes.
Hello, thank you again for bringing this great series to the screen and for filming in Texas. Filming at Fort Hood, I know you've kind of talked to your involvement with the military, but were you able to employ any veterans, and can you kind of talk to kind of that experience?
Yes, it was one of the great privileges of this project that we would try to hire veterans for any supporting parts that we could. In our first episode, the chaplain that you see is an actual Fort Hood chaplain and a Sutter City veteran. We had in the rescue convoys former veterans who had been in the rescue convoy. We had probably 15 veterans who consulted on the project and also active duty military. To me, I was on, this past Monday, I spoke at an event for an organization called Got Your Six, which promotes veteran engagement in the entertainment industry. And I was just saying that veterans have so much more to offer our industry than just technical advice about war. And it was amazing in Fort Hood to see, we had, it's one of those things where the aid station sequences that you see in the series, we had 2 people who had been at the aid station that day participating in recreating those scenes as supporting players. So wherever we could hire veterans or active duty military, we did.
Do we have any other questions in the audience? I think we have just a few more minutes. Yeah.
Hi, excuse me. Thank you all so much. I have a question pointed towards Eric. So I have a family member who's a veteran and suffers from PTSD very badly. And I guess my question is as a family member, how would you say is the best way to support somebody that is a veteran? And then also, as a civilian to somebody who, speaking with someone who's a veteran, what would you say is the best way to engage and be respectful to them and support them?
I'd say much like anything, it's by asking questions. You know, at least for me and everybody that I know, PTSD is kind of an individual thing. You know, it's a physiological response to trauma, and the way everybody deals with it's differently. So I think just being open and asking honestly, you know, hey, how can I help, or what can I do to make the situation better for you, would probably be the best way. My wife, she's out there. She might have one of the, you know, a better answer that she might want to throw out. But I hope that answered your question.
Any other questions? Yes.
This is for Kat and Noel. What was your biggest takeaway from working on this series?
It's kind of a big question. I think for me personally, I think it's been touched on here before, and it's something that Eric and actually another cast member of ours, John Beavers, puts really, really well. This is a story that is hopefully can create a bridge between, you know, the 1% of our population that actually is involved in the military and everyone else, because at this point it's you know, war is really, really distant. It's a really, really it's just a concept for most people, and for myself included, it's very far away. And this story hopefully does a good job of showing that this is it's not a concept. It's lived experiences that it's paid for by individuals. And that's something that I think that the entire rest of the population really needs to take on as an understanding, because we're involved in it, whatever position we take on anything. And so I think that that's important to understand in kind of an experienced way, and hopefully being able to see personal experiences from people that actually have gone through this, that at least allows there to be space for a dialogue.
I think I had 2 major takeaways. I think my experience as a civilian before this was pretty typical. I was always very grateful for our service members and would post on Veterans Day and things like that, but it felt something like it was something separate from me. I think the big thing I realized is that not only the people who serve, but also their families, make a commitment and a sacrifice, not only active duty, but when they come home, they live with that for the rest of their lives, and their wives and husbands and parents, all of their family and loved ones. So for me, it was a greater appreciation to and this reverence for those who serve. and also a realization that that is a sacred sacrifice, and one that, like Noel and a lot of people have said, hopefully this will create a bridge between civilians and those who serve, so that 1% doesn't feel so isolated and so separate, that they feel supported, that they feel seen, that they feel honored for their sacrifice.
Yeah, actually, something else I'd actually like to say to that, because I think the single big, if I could say one sentence in terms of what I would take away from this, my biggest takeaway is that we've got to do everything we can for people when they come back, and the families and their caretakers and everything, and that's not something we're doing nearly enough. That was probably my single biggest takeaway.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. So I want to say thank you to Eric Borquin, Catherine Willis, Noel Fisher, and the show's creator and executive producer, Miko Alan. Thanks so much to everybody for coming and joining us here tonight in Austin, as well as across the country. Please spread the word and tell everyone you know. The show's on Tuesdays here in the U.S.
10 p.m. Our new time.